Life threw me a curveball that turned into a full-on soap opera. My son Liam and his wife Sophie betrayed me in the worst way, and I ended up pulling off a plan that still makes my head spin. Was I wrong for how I handled it? Pour the coffee. This is a wild ride and I'm spilling all the tea. Well, butter my biscuits. Life sure knows how to toss a gal into a telenovela. I'm Eleanor, a 62-year-old retired librarian with a knack for gardening and a heart bigger than a Texas watermelon. Family was my North Star. For years I poured my soul into my husband, George, and our boy, Liam, tending my garden of roses and zinnias, cataloging books at the library, and pinching pennies to make their lives sparkle. Every Thanksgiving I spent wrestling a turkey into the oven, every Christmas crafting handmade ornaments. It was all for them. When George passed from heart disease 2 summers ago, it was like someone yanked the rug out from under my feet, leaving me sprawled in a heap of grief. Our little house in Willow Creek, just outside Houston, was a museum of memories. His coffee mug on the counter, his old fishing hat by the door. I couldn't stay, so I sold it, every creak of the floorboards echoing his laugh. Liam, a software developer who could make computers sing, and his wife Sophie, a graphic designer with a flair for fancy logos, said I could crash with them for a spell. I've still got my boy, I thought. We'll weather this storm together. But Sophie? Lordy, she treated me like a stray cat who'd wandered into her pristine gallery. From the moment I shuffled into their cramped guest room, lugging my 2 suitcases and a heart full of hope, she barely glanced my way. Her hazel eyes were glued to her tablet, sketching away, lips pursed like she'd bitten a lemon. I tried to make myself useful, whipping up my famous vegetable stew, scrubbing their dishes until they gleamed, even offering to fetch groceries from the corner market. I dusted their shelves, fluffed their couch pillows, anything to feel like I belonged. But Sophie's sighs were louder than a Houston thunderstorm. I'd be humming along to my Beethoven CD, lost in memories of shelving books to those same notes, and she'd march over and snap it off mid-symphony, muttering about needing quiet for her creative process. Once, as I passed her in the hall with a load of laundry, I swear I heard her whisper, "Leech." My heart dropped like a stone in a pond, but I told myself I'd misheard. Maybe she said, "Peach." I looked to Liam, his nose buried in his laptop, coding some app. "She's just swamped with work," he'd mumble, not meeting my eyes. I bit my tongue like any mama does, thinking love means swallowing the hurt. Then came the night that broke me like a cheap teacup. We were gathered around their oak dining table, steam rising from my vegetable stew, carrots and potatoes bobbing in a broth I'd simmered all afternoon. The silence was thicker than my gravy. Sophie set her spoon down with a clink and fixed me with a stare colder than a January breeze. "This can't keep going," she said, her voice sharp as a paper cut. "We're not running a charity house." I froze, my spoon hovering, broth dripping onto the tablecloth I'd ironed that morning. "What are you getting at, Sophie?" I asked, my voice wobbling like a bad radio signal. She smirked, leaning back. "How long do we have to keep this up? You're not pitching in, not earning. We've got bills piling up like laundry." My chest tightened, my eyes flew to Liam, pleading for my boy to say something, anything. He stared at his bowl, stirring it like it held the secrets of the universe, and muttered, "Maybe it's best if you find something more permanent, Ma, for everyone's sake." The words hit like a slap I didn't see coming. I didn't yell or cry, I couldn't. I just stood, legs shaky, and trudged to my room. I packed my 2 suitcases, my gardening gloves, a photo of George and me at the county fair, my favorite cardigan, my whole life whittled down to what I could carry. I walked out into the Houston night, the wind slicing through my coat, my heart heavier than a library's worth of books. I felt like I'd been erased, like I was nothing but a smudge on their perfect life. All I could think was, how did my boy, my Liam, let this happen? I found myself on the curb outside their Houston apartment complex, my 2 suitcases beside me, the November wind cutting through my old wool coat like it had a personal grudge. I sat there for an hour, my phone as dead as my spirits, waiting for Liam to come running out, maybe say, "Ma, we messed up, come back." But he didn't. Sophie didn't even bother with a wave from the window. My heart felt heavier than a stack of encyclopedias, and I wondered how I'd ended up so alone. I dragged myself to a motel down the road, the kind of place where the neon sign flickered vacancy, like it was apologizing. I collapsed on a lumpy mattress, the springs creaking louder than my aching joints, and stared at the water-stained ceiling. What did I do to deserve this? I kept asking myself. I'd given Liam everything, bandaged every scraped knee from his bike riding days, read him The Velveteen Rabbit until the pages wore thin, saved every dime to send him to coding camp. How could my boy let Sophie kick me to the curb like an overdue library book? The next morning I sent Liam a text with trembling fingers. I understand, sweetheart. I'll always love you. I waited, checking my phone like it was a lifeline. No reply. Days turned into weeks and I sent more messages. Happy birthday wishes, little notes about the roses blooming in my mind's garden, nothing. The silence was louder than a church choir, and it cut deeper every day. I tried to find work, figuring a job might patch the hole in my heart. But who hires a 62-year-old librarian with knees that creaked like an old oak in a storm? I applied at bookstores, picturing myself shelving novels with a smile, but they said I was overqualified. Cafes wanted younger folks who could hustle, not a gal who needed a moment to stand up straight. I even tried the community center, hoping to teach gardening classes, but they called me not a good fit, which I knew was code for too old. My savings, once a tidy nest egg from years of frugal living, dwindled faster than ice cream in July. I started counting coins for coffee, skipping meals to stretch my dollars, feeling like a weed in my own life's garden. The loneliness was the worst part, like drowning in molasses, slow, sticky, suffocating. I'd sit in that motel room, the TV buzzing with infomercials I couldn't afford to care about, and feel shame creep in like an uninvited guest. Had I failed as a mother? Was I too soft, too trusting, pouring my love into Liam only for him to turn away? I'd look at the photo of George and me at the county fair, his arm around my shoulders, both of us grinning like fools, and my chest would ache. I missed his laugh, his steady hand, but most of all I missed being someone's family. One chilly evening, desperate to feel anything but pain, I pulled out a cardboard box I'd hauled from the old house. It was stuffed with keepsakes, old letters, a pressed zinnia from my first garden, a library card from my first job. I was hoping for a spark of joy, something to remind me who I was before this mess. At the bottom, tucked under a faded quilt square, I found my father's journal, its leather cover worn soft from years of handling. I hadn't touched it since I was a girl, sneaking peeks at his woodworking notes. Something too about the weight of it in my hands felt different, like it was whispering, "Open me." I set it on the rickety motel table, my heart doing a little two-step of curiosity and dread. That journal, y'all, was the first curveball in a story I didn't know I was living. My father's handwriting, all neat loops from his woodworking days, felt like a warm hug from the grave. Most pages were cozy and familiar, filled with notes about Houston's rainy springs, the county fair where he'd won a ribbon for a cedar bench, or how he fussed over the price of oak at the lumberyard. It was like flipping through a scrapbook of my childhood, back when he'd carved me little wooden birds to line my windowsill. But then I turned to an entry dated May, and my heart did a flip like a flapjack on a griddle. "He came by again today," my father wrote, his words careful but heavy. "He said he wished we could be together openly, but his family, his career, his name, it's too much. Eleanor must never know. I pray she understands I loved her, even if she was born from a mistake." My hands shook so bad I nearly dropped the journal. A mistake? Me? I read it again, then a third time, my bifocals fogging up from the tears I didn't realize were falling. I kept turning pages, piecing together a story I'd never heard. My father had been in love with Charles Edward Langley, a big-shot architect whose sleek buildings dotted Houston's skyline like fancy bookends. There were hints of secret meetings at quiet cafes, moments stolen in the shadow of Langley's polished life. My father mentioned small payments, cash he needed for bills but hated accepting, his pride stinging worse than a bee in my rose garden. Then came another entry from a crisp fall day that stopped my breath. "He swore he'd take care of her," my father wrote. "A trust handled by his lawyer Evelyn Harper, to give Eleanor a piece of what he built. It's not official, too risky, but he promised she'd never want for anything." I sat there, stunned, the motel's flickering lamp casting shadows on the peeling wallpaper. I wasn't just the mom Liam and Sophie had tossed out like last week's leftovers. I was the daughter of a man I'd never known, a man whose name was on half the city's blueprints. My whole life I'd thought my father was my only parent, raising me alone after my mother passed when I was a baby. Now this journal was rewriting my story, like finding a hidden chapter in a book you thought you'd finished. My heart raced faster than a hummingbird's wings. I shuffled to the motel's lobby, where an ancient computer hummed like it was on its last legs. I typed Evelyn Harper, attorney Dallas, into the search bar, my fingers clumsy on the sticky keys. Up popped a listing for a retired estate lawyer, her name tied to a small firm in Dallas. I leaned back in the creaky chair, the lobby's stale coffee smell mixing with my spinning thoughts. This wasn't just a journal, it was a lifeline. A seed planted long ago that might just bloom into something new. I didn't know what came next, but for the first time since I'd walked out of Liam's apartment, I felt a spark of something besides despair. Maybe, just maybe, this old librarian had a few pages left to write in her own story. And if you're wondering, yes, I kept that journal closer than my gardening trowel, because it was the first hint that my roots ran deeper than I'd ever imagined. With my father's journal clutched to my chest like a prized rosebush, I sat down at the motel's wobbly table and wrote a letter to Evelyn Harper, the Dallas lawyer he'd mentioned. My hands trembled so much my handwriting looked like a chicken scratched it, but I poured out my story, losing my husband Liam and Sophie kicking me out, finding that journal. I sealed it with a prayer and a stamp, hoping it wasn't a fool's errand. 2 weeks later my phone buzzed and a warm, cautious voice said, "Eleanor? I'm Evelyn Harper. I always wondered if you'd reach out. Can you come to Dallas? There's something waiting for you." My heart did a little Texas two-step. Was this real? I wasn't sure, but I wasn't about to sit in that musty motel wondering. I bought a ticket with my last bit of cash, half convinced I'd end up scammed like those folks who fall for fake sweepstakes. The bus ride to Dallas was a bumpy blur, my mind spinning with what-ifs as I doodled zinnias in my notebook to calm my nerves. When I stepped into Harper's office, tucked in a quiet corner of downtown, it felt like walking into a library after hours. Still, serious, smelling of old paper and wisdom. Dusty law books lined the shelves, and Evelyn, a silver-haired woman with kind eyes, greeted me like an old friend. She handed me a yellowed envelope, the edges brittle as dried leaves, addressed in elegant script to my daughter Eleanor Jane. My breath caught. It was from Charles Edward Langley, the architect whose name I'd seen on Houston's fancy buildings. I tried to read it, but tears blurred the words before I got past the first line. Langley confessed his love for my father, their secret meetings, and his regret for staying hidden behind his polished life. His family, his career, his reputation. He wrote of a promise. A portion of his personal wealth, tucked away from his estate, was mine. I looked up at Evelyn, my voice barely a whisper. "Is this for real?" She nodded, sliding a thick folder across her desk. "It's yours, Eleanor. Always was." Inside were bank accounts, investment records, property titles. Over $2 million. More money than I'd ever dreamed of. My hand shook like I'd grabbed a live wire. Me, a retired librarian who counted pennies for coffee, was holding a fortune. That night, back at a cheap Dallas motel, I didn't toss and turn like I had in Houston. For the first time in months, I grinned, a real ear-to-ear smile that felt like sunshine on my face. Liam and Sophie thought they'd left me with nothing, but they didn't know I'd just found a golden ticket. I stayed in Dallas a few days, wandering parks with my sketchbook, drawing daisies and bluebonnets under sprawling oaks. Each petal I sketched helped me process this new truth. I wasn't just the mom they'd discarded. I was Eleanor Jane, daughter of a man who'd left me a legacy, even if he couldn't give me his name. The hurt from Liam's silence and Sophie's sneers still stung, but it was like finding a hidden seed in my garden. Something new was ready to grow. Sitting on a park bench, watching kids chase pigeons, I felt a shift. I wasn't just surviving, scraping by on wilted hopes. I was rewriting my story page by page like a novel I'd shelved too long. My gardening gloves were packed away, but my hands itched to plant something new. Not roses, but possibilities. I didn't know what I'd do with all that money, but I knew one thing. Liam and Sophie had underestimated me, and this old gal was about to bloom in ways they'd never see coming. I tucked Langley's letter in my purse, right next to my father's journal, and headed back to the bus station, my heart lighter than a dandelion seed on the wind. Back in Houston, I traded that dingy motel for a sleek downtown apartment, all shiny hardwood and windows that caught the sunrise like a picture frame. No more peeling wallpaper or vending machines that ate my quarters, just a clean slate, far from the hurt Liam and Sophie had dished out. I was done feeling like a wilted petunia. So I parked myself at my new kitchen table with a laptop I'd bought on sale and started watching YouTube videos on real estate and investing. Those young folks in sharp suits talking about cash flow and equity lit a fire in this old librarian's heart. I wasn't about to let anyone make me feel powerless again, not after what I'd been through. One muggy afternoon, sipping iced tea with a sprig of mint from my balcony herb garden, I was scrolling through auction sites on a whim. My cursor stopped cold on a listing that hit me like a lightning bolt. The complex where Liam and Sophie's apartment was located, right in Houston, was put up for sale. Tax defaults had made it a bargain, like a rare book nobody else bid on at a library sale. My pulse raced, my hands hovering over the keyboard. This wasn't just chance. It felt like the universe handing me a trowel to dig up something new. That complex was where Sophie had sneered at my vegetable stew, where Liam had let me walk out with 2 suitcases and a broken heart. I leaned back in my chair, the hum of the city below like a whisper of possibility. I called Evelyn Harper. "Evelyn," I said, "I've got an idea, but I need to stay invisible." She didn't miss a beat, helping me set up EC Holdings, an anonymous LLC with all the legal bells and whistles. I pictured her in her book-lined office, probably smiling at my nerve. We filed the paperwork and I transferred funds from that inheritance, over $2 million, still surreal to think about. Bidding on the property was like placing a hold on a library book. Quiet, quick, and nobody saw me coming. The auction day passed without a fuss, and just like that, I owned the whole darn complex. Me, Eleanor Jane, the gal they'd called a leech, now held the deed to the place where Sophie had rolled her eyes and Liam had stared at his shoes. I wasn't plotting some big vendetta, not exactly, but I couldn't help a little chuckle as I whispered to myself, let's see how Sophie fancies paying rent to someone she thought was less than nothing. It wasn't about spite, it was about balance, like pruning a shrub to let it thrive. Holding that power felt odd, like gripping a paintbrush loaded with colors I'd never used before, ready to splash my life onto a fresh canvas. I sat on my balcony that evening, my gardening gloves folded neatly beside me, watching Houston's skyline twinkle. The hurt from Liam's silence still ached, and Sophie's cold words still stung, but I wasn't that woman on the curb anymore. I was Eleanor with a deed in my name and a spark in my soul, ready to tend this new garden of mine with care. My fingers itched to plant something bold, and for the first time, I felt like I was holding the pen to my own story, not just shelving someone else's. Owning that apartment complex gave me a strange kind of power, like holding a garden hose and deciding where to aim the spray. I didn't want to drown Liam and Sophie in misery. I just wanted them to feel the weight of what they'd done, like a soggy pair of boots after a Houston downpour. So I sent a notice through my property manager, a no-nonsense fellow named Carl, tripling their rent. I cited market rates and overdue fees, all perfectly legal, thanks to Evelyn Harper's airtight paperwork. Sophie went off like a firecracker, flooding Carl's inbox with emails sharper than my pruning shears, demanding explanations, oblivious that I, Eleanor Jane, was the one pulling the strings. She'd never suspect the old librarian she'd called a leech. One humid evening my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Liam, his voice tight as a new guitar string. "Ma, something's off with the rent. It's way up and Sophie's losing her mind. Can we talk?" I sat on my balcony, my mint plant tickling my nose, and listened to it twice. My heart twinged for my boy, but I didn't call back. This wasn't about a quick jab to hurt them. It was about consequences, slow and steady, like waiting for roses to bloom. I'd spent months drowning in their silence. Now it was their turn to feel the squeeze. I poured money into the complex, turning it from a drab box into a place folks could be proud of. I had the walls painted a soft sage green, swapped flickering bulbs for bright LEDs, and installed security cameras that blinked like fireflies. Tenants sent thank you notes through Carl, raving about the new mailboxes and the landscape courtyard with marigolds I'd picked out myself. Everyone was thrilled, except Sophie, who was unraveling faster than a cheap sweater. Her emails to Carl got nastier, full of capital letters and exclamation points, like she thought shouting in print would change the deed in my name. I kept my distance, letting EC Holdings do the talking, my anonymity as snug as my favorite cardigan. One night I drove by the complex in my old hatchback, the Houston skyline glowing like a promise in the distance. I slowed near their unit, the curtains thin enough to show shadows moving inside. Liam was pacing, his lanky frame unmistakable, while Sophie's sharp gestures cut through the air like she was arguing with the world. My heart ached for my son, caught in her storm, but the sting of their betrayal, Sophie's sneer, Liam's silence as I packed my bags, kept me grounded. I wasn't doing this to be cruel. I was planting a lesson, hoping it'd take root. Then came a twist that made my stomach lurch. Carl called me one morning, his voice low. "Eleanor." A neighbor reported hearing glass breaking in the Harmon's unit last night, followed by dead quiet. Should we check on them? My mind raced. Had I pushed too far? I pictured Sophie hurling a mug in a fit, or maybe a shelf collapsing under her anger. I told Carl to keep an eye out but not to barge in. I didn't want to escalate things. Still, that eerie silence gnawed at me, like finding a wilted bloom in my garden. Had my plan sprouted thorns I hadn't expected? I sat on my balcony that evening, sipping sweet tea, my gardening gloves idle beside me. Liam's voicemail played in my head. His voice so like the boy who'd once begged for extra cookies. But the hurt they'd caused was a weed I couldn't ignore. I wasn't done tending this plot. Not yet. But I wondered if my harvest would be justice or just more pain. I decided it was time to show my cards, so I set up a tenant meeting at the apartment complex to talk about the renovations I'd funded. I knew Sophie would come spoiling for a fight, her temper hotter than a Houston sidewalk in July. I dressed for the occasion, a charcoal blazer, crisp white blouse, my gray hair styled in soft waves, looking nothing like the broken gal they'd kicked out. With my gardening gloves tucked away, I felt like a librarian ready to hush a rowdy crowd. I slipped into the meeting room early, choosing a chair in the back, my heart thumping like a drum in a parade. Sophie stormed in right on cue, her heels clicking like castanets, demanding, "Where's the owner? I want answers, and I want them now." Carl, my property manager, cool as a cucumber, said, "Questions will come after the presentation, ma'am." She huffed, plopping into a front row seat, her arms crossed tighter than a pickle jar lid. Liam trailed behind, eyes on his phone, looking like a kid caught sneaking cookies. The room filled with tenants. Folks I'd never met but whose lives I'd improved with new paint and marigolds. I sat quiet, my bifocals catching the fluorescent lights, waiting for my moment like a gardener eyeing a bud about to bloom. Carl kicked things off, listing the upgrades, new lighting, security cameras, a courtyard that didn't look like a weed patch anymore. Then he said, "We owe thanks to EC Holdings for making this place a home." That was my cue. I stood, smoothing my blazer, and said, "Good evening, y'all. I'm Eleanor, owner of this property." The room went so silent you could hear a pin drop on the linoleum. Sophie's head whipped around, her face twisting from confusion to red-hot fury. "You? This is absurd. You're behind all this?" She spat, her voice sharp enough to slice bread. I held her gaze, steady as an oak. "No games, Sophie. Just business. I've provided homes, made improvements, treated everyone fair and square. But I haven't forgotten what happened." Liam's eyes were glued to the floor, his cheeks flushed with shame, like he'd just been caught skipping school. Tenants started asking questions about the new mailboxes, the laundry room upgrades, and some even thanked me, their smiles warm as fresh-baked cornbread. Sophie sat fuming, her manicured nails tapping the chair arm like a woodpecker. When the meeting wrapped, most folks filed out, but she lingered, then marched up to me, hissing low, "You think you're untouchable? This isn't over, Eleanor." I raised an eyebrow, calm as a sunny afternoon. "You made it personal, Sophie. I just made it fair." Liam finally spoke, his voice soft but firm. "Sophie, that's enough." It landed like a pebble in a pond, ripples spreading across her face. Shock, then something like hurt. That was the first crack I saw in their wall, and it hit her harder than a dropped flower pot. I thought that was the end of it, but a few days later, I found a note slipped under my apartment door. The handwriting all sharp and jagged like Sophie's temper. "I know what you're doing," it read. "You don't scare me. I'll find you." My stomach churned, not from fear but from the sheer gall of it. I pictured her scribbling it in a fit, maybe over her fancy espresso machine, thinking she could spook me like a raccoon in my garden. I tucked the note in a drawer, shaking my head. This wasn't about being scared. It was about standing tall, like the roses I'd nursed through droughts. Sophie and Liam had underestimated me, but this old gal was just getting started, and my heart was set on tending this plot to the end. Things got murkier than a Houston bayou. Sophie's antics spiraled from petty to plum crazy. She bombarded my property manager, Carl, with emails posing as tenants, whining about the new paint or lights, and even called the title office, claiming to be a lawyer sniffing around EC Holdings. My attorney, Evelyn Harper, was ready with her legal pruning shears, sending a cease and desist letter that laid it out plain. Cease all harassment, including false complaints, impersonation, and disruptive behavior, or face legal action, including potential fines and civil claims. She backed it with a stack of evidence: tampered emails, tenant reports, even audio of Sophie's lobby rants about unjust rates. Sophie panicked, leaving Liam a note saying she was being hunted, before hightailing it out of Houston. Liam called me, voice wobbly as a loose wheel. "Ma, she's gone. Said you wrecked her life." I sipped my sweet tea, steady as a sunflower. "She did that herself, son." One rainy evening, Liam showed up at my downtown apartment, drenched like a stray pup in hand, just a need to talk. He stood in my doorway, his software developer slouch more boyish than ever. "Can we just talk, Ma?" he asked, eyes dodging mine. I nodded, ushering him to my couch, the rain drumming the windows like a soft apology. "I left her," he said, wringing his hands. "She was digging through my laptop, my bag, everything. I told her to stop and she flipped out. I changed the locks." My throat tightened. "You're seeing me now, Liam. That's a start." He looked up, hesitant. "How do you afford all this? The complex, this place?" I took a breath, my heart heavy with the truth. "Your granddad's journal led me to a lawyer in Dallas. Turns out, I'm the daughter of Charles Edward Langley, an architect. He left me an inheritance, over $2 million. I didn't know either, not until I was at my lowest." His eyes widened like he just opened a book to a missing chapter. "That spring, I sold the apartment complex, its sage green walls and marigolds included. Half the proceeds went to a shelter for displaced families, named the Robert House after my father, honoring the man whose words had changed my life. With the rest, I bought a cozy 2-bedroom in Willow Creek, shaded by oak trees with a porch swing perfect for my gardening dreams. Liam helped me move, lugging boxes of books and lavender pots like a kid earning pocket money. We tried making dinner, just toast and jam, but he burnt the bread to a crisp. We laughed, Lord, we laughed, the sound brighter than any bloom in my garden. "I'm sorry, Ma, for everything," he said, voice cracking. I hugged him, my heart full as a summer harvest. That night I stood on my porch, chamomile tea warming my hands, the air sweet with fresh turned earth. My new flower beds waited for roses come spring, and I whispered, "I forgive you." It wasn't just for Liam but for me, for thinking I was frail when I'd been a spark they never saw coming. Sophie's betrayal had cut deep, Liam's silence deeper, but I'd grown through it, like a zinnia breaking through clay. Had I gone too far, flipping their world to find mine? Standing there with my swing creaking and Liam's laughter still ringing, I felt I tended my garden just right.
Share your thoughts in the comments. What did you think of Sophie's reaction when Eleanor revealed she owned the complex? If you liked the story, subscribe to the channel and give us a like.